I think combination of psychometrics is a really useful thing. I mean, we've talked about personality measures, but we haven't talked about things like interest in
Mm.
or motivational measures as well. And I think they're all useful as well.
Mm.
And the thing I find about the mental toughness questionnaire is that I do find it simple to explain. And I think people get it straight away. I don't think there's, and I never have a problem with talking to people about the mental toughness concept. They always seem to get it straight away. Even if you use the 8 factors instead of the 4 as well, it's something that they do get and they understand. So there's been some really good work done there to make it accessible for people.
I think also the mental toughness and I suppose also resilience is such a growing important construct at the moment. It's interesting that just yesterday, I think it was yesterday, Gareth Southgate did his lecture on resilience, which I don't know if any of you saw, but
Yeah.
was fantastic. And I think that kind of links into a wider awareness that things like resilience, things like mental toughness, are so important for our own well-being, for our own mental health, and for our ability to perform well in work and academic environments.
I was very impressed with Southgate's presentation. It's the snowflake argument, but he never mentioned the word snowflake, did he?
Very well prepared, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He's very good, but I think one of the things that Gareth Southgate does very well is coming from a high performance environment and sport and everything. He doesn't lose that link between those kind of constructs, such as resilience and mental toughness and the like, with well-being. So sometimes we see people slip into that error of thinking high performance environments are all about performing well. So I did a master's in sport and exercise psych just over 20 years ago now. Yeah, a good bit over 20 years ago. And it was all about performance. It was all about how do you improve performance? How do you improve performance? How do you improve performance? I wrote a book on sports psychology 10 years ago, and it was mainly about performance. The second edition of that book came out this year, and a lot of it's about well-being. Because people in those kind of environments, actually, there's an understanding now that whatever environment you're in, and maybe it's sort of, maybe Maslow was right all along, right? But if you could be in the harshest high performance environment, the highest amount of pressure, but ultimately those mental toughness, resilience kind of constructs, where they're really valuable, is they mean that you don't use all of your capacity, all of your resources, just manage it, but you're well. You manage your internal states well enough that you can still perform, rather than having to kind of use every ounce of energy you have just to stay afloat, and then you've nothing left to perform. And I think we saw that with Gareth Southgate's lecture. That to me just shows how there's been huge progress in those kind of areas, because England could go back a couple of managers, and this is one where one day history will be very kind to Gareth Southgate. People will look back at England when he was the manager, because it's easy to forget that pre Gareth Southgate, England could not go to an international tournament without there being some scandal, some trouble in the camp or whatever. And then they've finally had a manager who was kind of into understanding people.
Yeah,
I've gone off a bit of a sidetrack there because you're not football.
So we've explored the challenges of getting people to understand what psychometrics are, and the difficulties of doing it, and there is complexity. We've all mentioned the science behind it, and I think it's the science that scares people. They think, "Oh, right, there's something magical behind what I'm seeing," and it's important to understand that. I haven't got the time, or I may not be clever enough to understand it. So. But there are ways of making that accessible. I think over our experience, over the lifetime of our business, is that we're probably selling and engaging with people who do have an understanding of psychometrics. So we're kind of working with the converted. What we need to do, of course, is convert a few more. And the two of you, have created a program to do that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? And of course, tell us why you put mental toughness at the heart of it.
Yeah, so we have created a program that is verified by the BPS, the British Psychological Society, that will then, if you do the course, you will be able to purchase ability tests from test producers and also understand and purchase personality measures. Now, not all personality measures need the level A and level B. That's the old speak. It's the training in test use qualification to be able to purchase, but it's really useful to be able to understand what you are using. And our test, the course that we have produced, we believe is accessible. It's all online, but there is the ability to do face-to-face as well in terms of catch-up calls and make sure that people are understanding it. And we hope that we've made it pretty accessible to people. And even the most difficult element of it, which is probably the statistics element, which Euan was mainly involved in developing, he's made it really accessible and useful in kind of, I think they're 10-minute bites, aren't they, Euan?
Yeah, some 5 to 10 minute bites, and all very visual, kind of animated approaches to learning statistical concepts. Sorry, that sounds a bit scary. Not all statistical concepts. It's also basic skills with psychometrics. So understanding things like reliability and validity and what they mean, but also some skills for developing your own psychometrics if you want to, or knowing how to select the right psychometrics, what things to look for, what things are important, really making it as easy as possible for people to understand psychometrics, be able to choose the appropriate tests. And develop tests themselves if they'd like to.
The other thing that's covered is the legal and ethical considerations, because there are some legal things that you need to understand, and also ethical considerations. That's also covered in the course. Doug, you asked me why we chose the mental toughness questionnaire to be at the heart of it. And I think I alluded to it earlier, is that I just find it a really easy psychometric to use. Everybody gets it. It's really useful in every area that I coach in. So, for example, I might be coaching somebody who is having a change in career or wanting to know what career direction to go in. Well, the mental toughness questionnaire is really useful there to look at whether the things that we've established, either through interest inventories or through their personal experience, whether they've got the ability at the moment to cope with the course that they will need to go through, in able to do that, and to help them build the skills in order to be able to go on the path that they have chosen.
And importantly, unlike my experience, you don't have to give up 10 days of your life.
So you've got no training on using.
That's also a consideration. People, I mean, even when it came down to 5 days, it was a switch off. So
yeah,
a little bit about how accessible your program is in that respect.
Yeah. Do you want to do that, Euan, or do you want?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, so it is very accessible. It's as Kirstin said earlier, it's set like short video chunks, and people can watch them at their own pace, fit them around their schedules. It's very accessible in that sense. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that, Kirstin?
Yeah, you can go at your own pace. It's fine. We usually say to people it's better to finish it within 6 months, so they can, fit it around their schedule. But it is just better to do that, because what we found was that people might have done the beginning bit and then had a big break, and then they'd forgotten the bits that link in. So it's better to kind of keep your foot on the pedal, so to speak. So we do generally say it's better to do it within 6 months, but as it's all online, you can go at your own pace.
And we may as well get a plug in while we're here, where can we find this?
Sorry, John, I missed that.
And where would we find this now? If I open up my browser, what do I need to type in?
You go to the AQR website, AQR International website, and I think it's under the training tab. Have I got that right, Doug? You might be able to help.
You have, yes. Yes. But it's entirely run by Kirstin and Euan.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have a look, but I'll be directing some of my students to that as well. So that'll be great. I just wanted to go back a couple of times, Kirstin. You've mentioned the interests inventories, which are interesting and often, I think, in academia are overlooked a bit. Perhaps, you know, there's some value that goes on seen there. Could you talk to us a little bit about experiences with sort of helpful interest base?
Yeah, so I use interest inventories quite a lot, and actually you do as well, Euan, don't you? With you, so Euan and I, one of the things that we do is work with people who are coming out of the military, usually wounded, injured, and sick, and they're transitioning into civilian life. And so as part of their transition program, they get a psychologist for 2 days, and they get given psychometric tests and some feedback and all of that. And it's really quite a good way for them, because they may have been in the military since they were 16 and suddenly they're 35 or whatever, and they don't know really where their interests lie, or even if they've got the ability to maybe do what they want to do. And it's just a really good way of kind of quite quickly accessing, or maybe not accessing, but actually being able to rule out things for them that wouldn't be useful for them to go and explore. So it gives us that kind of landscape for them to go away and explore different options for them. But I think one of the good thing is it rules things out for them. Would you agree, Euan?
Yeah. In fact, I was working with some service leavers last week in Catterick in the garrison in the north, and just seeing the impact on some of these people that I was working with as they kind of found out more about the things that the interests that they were well aligned for them, was fantastic. Just seeing their faces light up, they felt a lot more confident about where they wanted to go. It really makes a big difference to people, and it forms part of those wider conversations about meaning and who someone is and where they want to go and what they value and who they want to be. And I suppose this is the power of the more kind of face valid approaches, as they do tap into that sense of meaning. Because as humans, we all deal with meaning, don't we? It's who we are, who we want to be. What kind of person do we want to be like? What is our mission or our purpose in life? And I think those interest inventories fit well into that sense of meaning that we create.
Yeah. I think also, I think it'd be really, I often use interest inventories with actually university leavers at the moment. I don't know why they're all coming through, but they don't know where to go after university, and they may have kind of been shoehorned into choosing a specific degree for whatever reason, and then they don't know where to go with it or what to do. And I think I heard an expression the other day, I think it was called a procrastinators or something, where people are kind of not knowing what to do, so they just do a master's at uni because I think that will help. But yeah, quite recently I've used interest inventories and the Mental Toughness questionnaire in helping a couple of students decide what to do and where to go and what the challenges might be for them as well.
Yeah, that is like interesting, as you'd expect. So, because I always find this kind of squaring of a circle you have to do with sort of like, here's what I'm interested in, but also what am I good at? And I wrestled with that a lot, because I always felt the stuff I was I was a lot better at maths than I was at football. I hated maths and I loved football. And it kind of just having to sort of recognize them. A procrastinators, I like that. I think I did one of them. It did when I lived with four friends, and because I was obviously such a good influence around people, they'd all failed a year somewhere along the way on their undergrad. So I know they still had a year of uni left, and I didn't want to leave. Like, I was having a great time. I'll take that. That's one thing that I'll take from this that I think I'll use as my own procrastinators.
So I suppose one thing that I'd like to explore a little, and it goes back a little bit to the start of the conversation, and I think there's been some reference to it already, but a lot of the time, we are very practitioner orientated, and we go and take it out into the business world, the education world, but we often get focused on psychometrics and what a psychometric is. What we're beginning to learn is how important context is and how important the outcome is for the client. And I think that's the challenge. We very often talk about the psychometric first, but what we should be often talking about is what we've just been talking about is what we're trying to do. What difference are we trying to make? What's our purpose? Yeah. And by the way, here is a tool that can help significantly. And I think the less reliable measures have kind of done a good job there, and I think that's a challenge for the more sophisticated tools, the more complex tools at the other end, but it's more difficult sometimes to see those connections.
Good point. It's I think that's a really interesting point, and actually one of the modules that we do in the training is looking at doing person specification job analyses, and person specifications within an employment context, and then helping people link those specific competencies to valid and reliable tests that will actually assess those competencies. And I think that's really important, as you say, because unless you actually know what you're wanting to assess, it's difficult then to choose a test to actually assess that skill. But conversely, if you do know what you want to assess and you've found a test that assesses that well, that's both scientific and that's both reliable and valid, then you've got a fantastic way to actually measure whether that someone has got that skill, whether they're developing that skill, if you're using as a distance traveled measure, and things that they might want to do in the future to build that skill. So I think that's a really, really important point.
John and I run a mental toughness advisory board. It's got people from all over the world, partly academic, partly senior practitioners, and the direction of the discussion now is around looking at context, and not just the context for the individual or the organization, but if we learned anything in the last few months, it's about the global context as well. We respond to what's happening in countries as far away as Ukraine. It affects us, so it covers our picture of the world and what we think we can achieve. And psychometrics are valuable tools in helping us to maintain perspective.
Can I change direction completely and go back to something I wrote down and note, something you said a long time ago now, about the ability type tests and intelligence and stuff like that. I'm interested in this because you said how people kind of get them and they're clear and stuff. And from a conceptually, intelligence is pretty much one of the hardest psychological constructs to wrap your head around, and I'm not sure academics can explain it very well at all. There's so many different definitions and everything, but it's interesting then that it is kind of received and used pretty effectively for something that is so hard to actually pin down what it is. Could you just tell us a little bit about your experience of using those ability type tests and what kind of intelligence can we assess and what's the value?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when I mentioned that originally, I was thinking in the context of doing neurodiversity assessments. So we'll often use ability tests to get a sense of someone's underlying ability. and then measuring, as you say, whatever that is, and then measuring their attainment in relation to that underlying ability. And it is, yeah, it's a really interesting topic. I think there's so much debate over it, isn't there? What intelligence is? Is it one thing? Is it multiple things? Do people have multiple intelligences, or is there one underlying factor which defines people's ability on all different tests? So we tend to use we tend to use a measure of verbal and non-verbal ability, which I think people tend to understand relatively intuitively. Sometimes it needs to be explained to people, but generally I think there's a kind of intuitive understanding as to what that is. And then we'll compare that with people's attainment on specific skill sets. So, for example, their reading comprehension, things like that. And I think that's relatively clear to people. But yeah, obviously, when you look in the academic literature, it becomes a lot more complex and harder to understand.
Yeah, yeah. I just think it's a really interesting area. So, um, yeah, I suppose comprehension, verbal. Is there any sort of problem solving in there, or yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the
Go on, Euan. You were
No. Oh, sorry. No, yeah.
explaining it very well. So.
Well, it's just, yeah. So when we're doing the measures of, well, we use a very reliable, one of the most reliable measures of
Okay.
ability, which is the Wechsler test,
Oh
which
yeah,
has been around for many, many
yeah,
years. It's on its fourth, I think, fifth edition now in America, and
Yeah,
will be
it's
released in Britain next year.
coming out here next year, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And which is really good. I think it's
yeah.
got great face validity. It's obviously got great reliability. I can't remember what the
Mhm.
correlation coefficient is, but I think it's above 8. It's way up there, maybe even 9.9. People tend to get the same score again and again, so it's got good retest
Mm.
reliability, and it tells us something meaningful about people's ability to, yeah, solve problems. Exactly, people's their ability to do abstract reasoning, to
Mm.
solve visual problems. But then obviously there's the verbal components as well. And I think that's really important because you do get some people that are not so good at solving visual problems
Mm.
for whatever reason. But when it comes to vocabulary or, understanding words, understanding and solving problems using words, it's a very different situation for them. So I think that is important to use both of those measures. I know another popular tool is the Ravens matrices, which I think is just a
Mm.
visual tool. And personally, I think you miss out if you're just assessing visual problem solving.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think what's really good to get from the conversation in general there is the the different kind of approaches if we want to get a real understanding of someone because people are incredibly adaptable. So normally where somebody does have a weakness, they've probably adapted something and developed a strength so that
Mm.
weakness doesn't impact them as severely as it could. Not that they've necessarily sat down and said, I need to do this or whatever, but we kind of intuitively figure out ways around around things. So in terms of the different approaches to intelligence, personality inventories, and interest inventories, and stuff like that, I think you start to get a really good picture of the stuff you're doing is to kind of come at things from different angles to get some comprehensive view. So sounds mightily impressive.
Well, I think we've had a really, really good conversation. I don't know whether you would like to add anything to the conversation or even ask John or I a question.
I suppose I got a question. It's interesting. Did some recent research as part of my training as a psychologist, and so I studied some of your stuff, John,
Okay.
within the academic research. And I'm
Yeah.
interested as
If you needed to get to sleep.
no, it's really interesting. So I suppose my question really is, where's the future of mental toughness training? Mental toughness research going, do you think? What's the big kind of next step in terms of, I know this is a bit more geeky, but in terms of the research streams, where's the future direction?
Yeah, well, happy to answer that, Ruth. So we're always identifying a few big questions. I've actually got a big research project on the go at the moment. We're trying to map all of the evidence that exists related to mental toughness and different reported outcomes, whether they're health, physical health, mental health, well-being, performance-based stuff, and reviewing the rigor of research that's kind of purported that, so we can really clearly articulate either gaps or areas that could be further developed for researchers to pick up on. We've also a few projects on the go at the moment. I have this cross-cultural survey working out, because we always get asked if the sort of cultural impact or if there is a significant cultural impact. I think it's probably much smaller than people expect, because people, I think there's an allure to feeling that the group you belong to are in some way special and different from others. So we're doing some things around them. There's lots of work going on in terms of the development of mental toughness, and whether you necessarily need to develop your mental toughness, or it should intervention type programs be based more around understanding your mental toughness and being able to work with your various strengths and sensitivities that you have. And I'm also really interested in, and if anyone's willing to throw a couple of million of research funding my way, I'm happy to take it. But the impact on physical health. So we know the impacts of stress on physical health and chronic health conditions and life expectancy at a DNA level or cellular level. And if we understand mental toughness to essentially buffer that external environmental context that you're in to the internalization of stress and pressure, you should perceive less stress if you're more protected against it. Therefore, you should be a little bit more protected at a kind of cellular level against that stress for chronic conditions and things like that. So I'm mad keen to do more research in that area. The challenge is it's very intensive, costly research, but I think the potential benefits as a kind of preventative approach to well-being, rather than being better at firefighting a stressful situation, which I think is probably where we started off with mental toughness. You're in a really tough setting, there's a lot of pressure. How do you manage it? But in this more acute way. And I think actually it's what I think is fascinating is, given how resistant to change mental toughness is, it can change, it can develop, but it happens over years, not over weeks. I think it'd be really interesting to see how it impacts those long-term kind of chronic stress responses, and hopefully allows people to put energy into stuff that really matters in life and live a longer, happier life. That's all I'm trying to do. That's it.
Very noble.
We can add something down. I mean, we obviously work very closely with John and other colleagues. I mean, another colleague, Helen at Newcastle, has been doing some quite amazing things that we've only just learned about. So, and sort of stretching our knowledge about mental toughness and how it actually plays out in people. The things that we, from a practitioner perspective, are interested in is understanding the link, the contextual link. So how does mental toughness play out with other factors? We often focus just on mental toughness, but does a mentally tough or a mentally sensitive individual operate in a different way that we've got interest in a subject or are disinterested in a subject? So that's playing into your interest inventories or idea of interest. Whether they play out differently if you've got a lot of support or you don't have a lot of support. I think they do. So the more we learn about sort of it's its connection with other factors, the more we can come up with a more global approach to developing people, and perhaps a more systemic approach. We're beginning to understand that if you look at leadership, look at culture, obviously connected, team working and individual development, they all can have mental toughness at their root. They can all be rooted in mental toughness. So in that case, you can look at a systemic approach to developing individuals and organizations. And that's been the holy grail in organizational development, but nobody ever does it. You go to an organization and they do an initiative on teamwork in here, an initiative on OD here. I mean, the biggest one is we'll introduce independent, personal development plans, appraisals, and we'll introduce teamworking over here, but they don't connect the two, and the two clash. It's pretty commonplace. The other thing that we're particularly interested in is something that's been mentioned, and that's to rethink strengths and weaknesses. As John said, in 2002, when we started, the emphasis was, let's show you how to become more mentally tough. And that came out of the sports, the way the sports psychology community thought. Now it's about self-awareness, understand who you are, and optimize who you are. You don't have to change. You can just learn what you're good at and what you're not good at, and direct yourself to the things you're good at. And even trying to remove the term strengths and weaknesses, because every strength is also a weakness. It is just perspective. And so if we remove these terms, we might be able to get somewhere with people. If you tell somebody they've got a weakness, you're really starting from a negative position. If you tell somebody that they've got advantages and disadvantages in certain settings, you can have a more purposeful conversation. So we're very interested. And of course, the big one is AI. We are getting plagued by requests to look at how can AI play out with the mental toughness concept, especially with the psychometric measure. But our view is it's still very early days in terms of AI. You can do a search on AI. I can do a search on who is Doug Straharczyk, and one minute I get something really accurate, next minute I get something that is completely gobbledygook. The last time I looked, which was about 3 weeks ago, I've suddenly become an expert on emotional intelligence. And that's because I think some people have been putting out material about those mental toughness linked to emotional intelligence or whatever. So AI just works with what you can find.
I do think, I know it's a bit of a tangent, but I think the potential of AI, going back to what we were saying earlier about how sometimes really good scientific tools don't necessarily become particularly user-friendly. And I think there's a lot of potential there for AI to help in that kind of translation to something that can be kind of a little bit more detailed. The computing power of AI to look at data and identify patterns in that data that might be appropriate to an individual, I think has a lot of exciting opportunities. But I'd always work slowly and kind of cautiously around it. If done well, I think it has tremendous potential. If rushed, which it obviously will be by some, because it's always a race to market. I'm not getting to some sort of Marxist rant about neoliberalism or anything like that, but there's always this kind of race to market, which means you end up with a load of stuff that's rushed, lacks quality out there, which is a little bit of a shame.
So we had a previous guest. We had Professor David Clutterbuck, who is a well-known coach, and he spoke about AI and coaching. And he forecast that AI would eliminate the bottom rank of coaches. The coaches who do a very basic job. They go through the GROW model and deal with coaching as a process. So if that's the case, AI it's very appropriate for process-driven activity. But he forecast it would never replace the high end.
Yeah.
I heard there's a phrase, isn't there, that AI won't replace GPs, GPs who use AI will replace those who don't use AI, and it's that sense that it's meant to be something that works with us, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's still early days for AI, because even ChatGPT have just had to change all their algorithms because they were coming up with rubbish, and so we'll just bide our time.
Yeah, see what happens.
So thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
That's been a really, really great conversation, really enjoyable. I think we've put some of the world to rights, maybe.
Thank you for having us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. They're really interesting to speak.
Yeah, it's great to meet, great to chat.